I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Adam Hamilton, CEO of ZealLLC.com. He's speaking to us from the Colorado area. Welcome back to the show, Adam.
Hey, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, our scenery probably looks just like Colorado. Lots of snow in Vancouver, something pretty rare. It's been apparently 1,000 days since Vancouver got a serious snowfall, so I guess we were due.
Unbelievable. Wow. Over 3 years. I can't even imagine that living outside of Denver. We get a lot of snow in the winter, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, last 3 years, the snow has stayed on the mountains where it belongs. The mountains here for the skiers are beautiful. And with your higher U.S. dollar in Colorado, maybe come and visit us here. Whistler would be almost affordable.
I hear Whistler's epic. I've done a lot of skiing in Colorado. I haven't been to Whistler yet. But that's on my bucket list, definitely, without a doubt.
Well, it always gets rated the #1 ski resort in North America, as long as you bring lots of shekels.
Right on.
Gold has been experiencing a downturn lately. Is this a trend you expect to continue?
Absolutely not. Gold's been kind of a miserable mess since the election. It was kind of crazy. On election night, November 8th here in the States, as Donald Trump started to win Florida, which was the biggest battleground state with 29 electoral votes, the lead was going back and forth between Trump and Hillary, but eventually Trump pulled forward a little bit, and then the market started to go crazy. S&P 500 futures here were down 5%, limit down. The Dow was down. Dow futures were down 800 points, and gold shot up 4.8% on the worries of a Trump win. And that was on election night. It got as high as 1337 in the spot market, Jim. I think 1339 futures. And I was watching the returns with my wife that night. I was like, man, this is going to be awesome. Tomorrow's going to be one of the biggest gold stock days ever. You know, in Australia, gold stocks were up 15% in real time because gold spiked so much. And, you know, to me, that 4.8% gold run didn't seem excessive. That happened to be the exact gain the day after the Brexit vote success back in late June. And so I was really excited back then, being contrarian speculator. Then things started to change. At 3 in the morning Eastern time the next day, Trump gave his concession speech. Not only was he magnanimous, he said that Hillary Clinton called him in and conceded the race. And that started to kind of, you know, eliminate the concerns of a contested election, which is a big factor, kind of dogging investors are really worried about it. And so things started to reverse. S&P 500 futures started to rally. And gold started reversing that because all that gold buying on election night was safe haven buying. The next day it was interesting. I think Reuters did an interview with the famed investor Carl Icahn, you know, multi-billionaire, $10+ billion net worth. Apparently he was at Trump's party on the election night party the next morning, and he left to put $1 billion in S&P 500 futures, index futures. And he told this Reuters reporter that he would have put a lot more than $1 billion in because he thought it was ridiculous. The markets were down 5%. And I think that one act kind of single-handedly turned sentiment around. And ever since then, it's just been running like crazy. You know, people, for weeks and months before the election, people were like, oh, Trump's terrible. He's going to destroy the stock markets. We're going to see a huge sell-off, you know, 10, 20%. And I mean, every Wall Street bank was talking about this stuff, Jim. It was just crazy. And all of a sudden, on the day after the election, things started turning. The stock market started to rally modestly, and gold started to sell off. And here we are in early December, almost exactly a month later, and those trends have just continued. To your gold question, I don't think this trend will continue with gold, though. I think it's really overdone. The rallying stock market's caused selling in two fronts critical to gold. Number one is gold futures speculators here in the States. They've dumped a massive amount of long contracts. I was just doing some research this morning, and it looks like out of all the long contract speculators bought this entire gold bull market from mid-December last year to early July this year, they've unwound 66.3% of them. So effectively 2/3 of all the long contracts, the upside bets on gold that future speculators have bought, have been unwound. And their longs are finite. I mean, they can't sell longs forever. They're back down to a really low level, and so I think that futures selling is probably exhausting itself, Jim. The second factor in gold is the new record highs in the stock market that started coming after Trump won, and everybody's euphoric about all the good things he could possibly do, ignoring all the potential bad things and risks in the world, was heavy selling of that American GLD gold ETF, the world's leading gold ETF. And that's seen huge draws, just massive draws as well, as American investors sold GLD shares faster than gold was being sold. That hasn't seen the kind of drawdown that futures spec that long gold futures have seen, but nevertheless, it's been a huge sell-off. And so I think those sell-offs have about run their course. I'm expecting gold to bottom here any day if it hasn't already, and we should see this bull market resume.
What about the difference between gold bullion and gold stock? Do you see any divergence there?
Between gold bullion and gold stocks, like the miners?
Yes.
Yeah. The miners have gotten hit really hard as well. In some ways, they've done better than you would expect based on the sharp gold decline. In some ways, they've done worse. Ultimately, they'll follow gold, Jim. And so if gold bottoms here and reverses and heads higher, the miner stocks are going to greatly leverage its gains. They're still radically undervalued relative to the prevailing gold prices. And I say that based on fundamentals. One of the things we do at my company is every quarter we go through tons and tons of 10Q reports, quarterly reports from American and Canadian companies, Australian gold miners, and we look at how much they're actually mining gold for, how their cost structure looks, what their all-in sustaining costs are. And we use the biggest ETFs in America as kind of our basis for what stocks to look at. That's GDX for the major gold miners, GDXJ for the gold juniors, and SIL for the silver miners. And the costs are so low, Jim. I mean, we're talking all-in sustaining costs down around $900 an ounce and lower. And so, $11.50 gold is nothing for these companies. They can print money hand over fist. And so these gold miners are just sitting so pretty fundamentally, yet the markets are kind of pricing in an apocalyptic, gold plunge to zero on this miracle of Trump changing the world, So, yeah, I think the gold stocks will rally radically, greatly leverage gold's gains when it starts advancing again.
Donald Trump was named Person of the Year by Time magazine. Do you think he deserves it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Here in America, watching the election, full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Republican, a conservative, libertarian, and so I voted for Trump. I was really happy he won. But all year in America, people were just telling us what an idiot he is, how crazy he is, what a loose cannon he is. I mean, the media pushback against this guy was unlike anything I've ever seen in my lifetime, and so all the odds were just stacked radically against him. The Republican Party talked out against him. Republican congressmen and senators talked out against him. Everybody attacked him mercilessly for the whole year, yet he, won the hearts and minds of enough American people to win a pretty sweeping electoral vote victory. I realize that he lost the popular vote victory here in the States, but it's electoral votes that matter. And so, yeah, he's changing the world. He's going to do lots of amazing things, hopefully, and I totally think he deserves Person of the Year. He was such an underdog with everything stacked against him, yet he pulled it out and won the presidency of the United States, the most powerful job in the world. Pretty impressive.
Well, with Trump being a businessman, of course, he's going to be pro-business. Has that given business in America new optimism?
It has, Jim. It's given it tremendous optimism. I think some of that's well-founded. Trump has talked about cutting the corporate tax rate. Here in America, it's around, I think it's 35%. That's one of the highest in the world. It's one of the highest among developed countries, too. He's talked about cutting personal taxes, which means Americans will have more money to spend, so we can go buy more stuff, which will help corporations. He's talked about rolling back 85 to 90% of the regulations. Under the last 8 years under Obama, the regulations have just been choking, just crushing. I run a little investment company, and we're just amazed at the scale of regulations we've had to deal with, and we're nothing. We're just a, tiny business. And, I talk to other businessmen and owners of ventures. They're just getting crushed by this. So there's a lot of good things happening. But, before Trump won the election, one of his talking points, Jim, was talking about the United States stock markets being in a bubble. He called them a big, fat, ugly bubble. That's a direct quote. That was in late September in the first presidential debate. And before Trump was elected, the stock markets were near bubble territory. And just as November ended, because of the rally in November, by our measure, one of the things we do at Zeal is we look at all 500 S&P 500 companies, look at their trailing 12-month price to earnings ratios, and take a simple average and also market capitalization weighted average of those. And they actually exceeded 28.1 times on November 30th, 28.1 times earnings, 28 times as formal bubble territory, 14 times half that is fair value. So U.S. stock markets are literally in a bubble right now. And so no matter what Trump does, the stock market's overvalued. They need to correct. They need to see a bear market. It's been almost 8 years old, this bull in March. And, markets are cyclical. They're overdue for a major bear market. No matter what Trump does that's good, the stock markets are radically overvalued right now in bubble territory, and they need to correct hard, if not go into a bear market.
We'll have more with Adam Hamilton right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Adam Hamilton. Adam, what do you expect going to happen to oil? It's had a nice little spike here with OPEC saying they will cut back production, but will the world cut back production?
I'm pretty concerned about oil, Jim. I really want to be bullish in oil. You know, coming from the Denver area, there's so many, oil is such a big industry in the city. I have so many friends in oil and gas. I like the oil and gas companies. I like their relatively low valuations in a lot of cases, but I'm concerned about oil for several reasons. Number one, back to our stock market discussion, oil has a really high correlation with the stock markets. So if these bubble-level stock markets indeed sell off and roll over hard in the coming months, oil is going to fall with them. The way the oil futures speculators work is they assume if stock markets are rising, it must mean the economy is growing, therefore oil demand will increase. But when stock markets are falling, they assume that that global demand is going to drop because the economy is weakening. So selling off stock markets are a huge downside risk for crude oil, no matter what the conditions, you know, everything else aside. On the OPEC deal, my second concern is that, you know, OPEC is a bunch of cheating liars. You know, you can look at all the cuts they made since the early 80s, and they always promise big cuts, and yet they never carry through. I think the average compliance rate is about 60%. So if they promise 1.2 million barrels a day, like last week, we might get 700K barrels per day out of it, and that's not much. And that brings me to my third concern. Oh, another thing about OPEC, Jim, is they had artificially inflated levels. They're cutting from record high levels of OPEC production, and so it's not a major cut. It's not as big a cut as 1.2 million barrels per day sound. And the final thing is here in the States, and maybe in Canada as well, but definitely in the States, we have like 2,000 plus drilled but uncompleted oil wells. You know, companies drilled the wells. All they need to do is frack them. And there's something like 300 frack crews, you know, sitting around looking for work. And so as soon as oil goes above 50 decisively, or maybe 55, you know, all these oil wells that are completed and ready to be finished will be finished and fracked, and all of a sudden we'll have this huge boost in production in the United States. I think that'll easily offset the likely 700K barrel per day decline in OPEC production if they have 60% compliance with their promise. And so all three of those things together make me concerned about oil. I think it's probably going to go lower. We have record oversupply in a lot of parts of the world. China allegedly has filled up their reserves and might not be importing more oil. Just a lot of things that make me bearish in oil, even though I certainly don't want to be.
Yes, we forgot all about China snapping up oil and gold at the same time. You can probably store a whole lot more gold than you can oil.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, back in oil earlier this year, there's some companies that analyze satellite photographs for hedge funds, and they were looking at the super tanker traffic going into China and the oceans, and apparently it was just radically above record levels, like these huge lines of super tankers in the oceans. I've seen some of these pictures. They're really incredible. And the worry is that China filled up its strategic petroleum reserves, every place it can possibly store oil, even commercially, back early this year when oil prices were low. Therefore, it's not going to be as big a marginal buyer going forward. I mean, China will import what it needs to run its economy, but it's not going to import additional marginal oil on top of that to fill up tanks like it's been doing for a lot of this year. And so it's definitely a really big concern on the oil front.
Does that mean, I know last spring people were saying, well, everything's full, the storage facilities are full, what are the oil companies going to do? Well, somehow they found room for all that oil. Perhaps this spring that won't happen.
That's true, yeah. Eventually those tanks are going to fill up. I know they've been building tank farms like crazy down by Cushing, Oklahoma, for instance, the hub of the U.S. pipeline network. But yeah, eventually they're going to run out of space for all this oil. And, you know, my understanding, oil fundamental data is kind of iffy, just like gold fundamental data. You know, you got to take it with a grain of salt. You know, there's some estimates in there, but, you know, everything I see looks like storage is filling up around the world, including floating storage, where they just they rent a super tanker and throw a bunch of oil in it and, you know, park it outside a port someplace for 3 or 6 months, hoping they can sell it for more money in the future. You know, there's a lot of stuff like that going on, and the oil market really feels top of me, really feels euphoric, and I think that's a kind of an offshoot of the euphoria in the stock markets, just the whole, you know, stock markets are up, so the world economy is growing, therefore oil demand will go up thing, which I think is a really kind of grave error now, given the dangers in the stock markets.
And now for the consumers, Jaguar in Britain is opening a factory employing 11,000 people to make electric sports cars. What's that going to do to the perception that oil is still needed?
Interesting. Electric cars in the States are growing more popular. You have the Teslas, which are super expensive, not many people can afford, but Chevrolet is producing the Volt, which is a lot more affordable. And, I think that is a long-term factor that'll drive down oil consumption. You might know, Jim, but I forgot the percentage of oil that goes into gasoline refining for passenger vehicles. It's a fairly high percentage, if I recall, maybe even over half. And so electric cars would definitely be a long-term bearish factor for oil, without a doubt.
Of course, other things probably won't be electric for a long time, like jetliners.
That's a good point. I heard they've made drones that are big enough to put people in them, though, so maybe they can get the batteries to work on small airplanes, but who knows?
Of course, the future comes up and smacks you in the face faster than you think.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how, you read about history. Market history in particular is one of my passions, and it's amazing how people get content and comfortable with technology around them, and then the change happens, and within a decade or two, the world's just radically changed, like the advent of the airline industry, the advent of the internet. Things change really fast. We can see these big changes and within, relatively short spans even for humans to observe, and that really changes supply and demand profiles for commodities and stocks and everything around the world.
Yes, and one of the things that wasn't really predicted at all was the way your cell phone, your handheld telephone would become a computer and a lifeline in so many cases.
Absolutely. One area I find interesting in that, Jim, is the damage the cell phones have done to the computer industry. Everybody used to need to have a decent computer at home to work on. Some people still do, but a lot of people, especially the young people, apparently are content with their iPhones or Android phones. They can do enough computing on there. They can get enough data. They can do whatever they need to do in there, so they don't buy PCs anymore. So the PC market's just seeing colossal declines in recent years because of the advent of the cell phones. And who would have thought 10 years ago, before the original iPhone, that phones would be a threat to personal computers? It would have seemed like a ludicrous notion back then. Yet here we are today.
Yeah, the rush for cell phones back then was to make them smaller and smaller, and now they're getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, they're getting pretty crazy, almost like carrying a tablet in your pocket.
Any last thoughts here, Adam, on what you think the markets are going to do going into the new year?
No matter what Trump does, no matter how awesome he is, even if he's the savior of the world, the stock markets are overvalued. They're near bubble territory. They need to correct hard. They need to enter a new bear market. Typical bear markets after long bull markets are 50% declines, Jim. So I expect the stock markets to be cut in half in the coming years. Politically, the Republicans in the United States, which control the whole government now, have it in their best interest to level with the American people about the state of the stock market sooner rather than later, because they have a chance, a narrow window for a few months here, to blame any stock market bear on Obama's policies in the 8 years before the Republicans took power. Also, that'll be before the 2018 midterm elections, 2020 presidential election. And so I think there's going to be a lot of political talk about stock markets being overvalued, about the artificial nature of the zero interest rate policy the Fed's been running for a decade. And I think stock markets are at a huge risk for serious downside early next year, Jim. And, even if Trump can do great things, it's going to take a year or two for these policies to filter down and actually have cash flow and profit impact on companies. So we're in a really dangerous kind of air pocket here for stock markets that are trading at bubble valuations. And if stock markets sell off materially, gold's going to come roaring back with a vengeance. Gold is kind of like the anti-stock trade. It's the ultimate portfolio diversifier. So people tend to buy gold. Investors flood into gold when stock markets drop. That's what ignited this bull market this year back in January. Stock markets are falling sharply in a correction. So people start buying gold. And that's going to just happen again with a vengeance, especially with both future speculators and investors so underinvested in gold right now. Actually radically underinvested. So I see much lower stock prices and much higher gold in the first half of next year and probably all throughout the year, really.
Adam, thank you so much for talking with us.
Great to see you, Jim. Thank you so much.
My guest has been Adam Hamilton, CEO of ZealLLC.com. He was speaking to us from Colorado.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.